Hey guys, today we're in the book of Genesis, chapter 36. Now, when you read this chapter, you were like, oh my goodness, what is there important about this chapter? And really, this chapter is just a long list of names, but there's a couple things I want to remind you of as you read this chapter. Verse 2, it says, Esau took his wives from the Canaanites. If you remember, back in Genesis 24, 26, we see that Abraham forbid Isaac to marry any of the women from Canaan. But here, we have Esau doing that. So we can see it was kind of forbidden on the God side, but it was allowed and even went plentiful among Esau's side. Another thing I want to point out is verse 7. It says, For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. Israel, Jacob and Esau hooked back up and they came to the promised land and they began to build their wealth and their land, their servants, their animals, and basically it got too big. Now, why is this important? If you remember the story of Jacob and Esau, God said that he would bless both of them, Jacob and Esau. And so here we have Jacob, who's going to be blessed spiritually. He will do well in wealth and material, but also being blessed in that spiritual nature that the Messiah is going to come through him. But he promised that he would bless Esau also. And we see this, that he became materially wealthy, right? They became too big. They could not stay. And so we have Esau going to the hill country of Seir. Now, Seir is what we would say the southeast region of Israel. We would call that today is modern Jordan, where I'm going to be in just a few weeks. What's interesting about this, right? So Esau produces another country called Edom, or the Edomites. We will see the Edomites continually as we read through the Old Testament. They, as of this moment, are not necessarily enemies of Israel, but they will become great enemies of Israel, and we will see this friction, this rub, as we continue to read Exodus, Numbers. Even in Deuteronomy, we will constantly see this kind of rub of the descendants of Esau always fighting against the descendants of Jacob. And notice it says in verse 15, these are the chiefs of the sun. When it uses this word chiefs, or maybe in your translation it might say princes, it really does show how much God kept his promise. He did bless him, and in this he produced chiefs and priests and created this huge nation and this chain of command. If you remember back in Genesis when Jacob and Esau was being born, we realized that it was going to be two nations. They were always struggling against one of them. And we know from the New Testament readings that we did last year that we find out, it says that Jacob God loved and Esau God hated. Now, what is he talking about? Here, they're both, once again, materially blessed well. So when God says he hated him, he didn't hate him so much that he didn't want anything to do with him. He still blessed him. He still did all the things that he promised to do, but he hated him in the sense that there was a spiritual difference between them. Jacob came to God by faith, and Esau never came to God by faith. And we will see that this distinction, that Israel follows down this trail of faith and Esau follows down this trail of judgment and of wrath. And so we will constantly see this. One last thing I want to point out to you in the verse 16, giving us these people, verse 16, Korah, Gottman, and Amalek. Amalek becomes somebody important as we continue to read. This will be the father of the Machilites. And the Machilites will be truly enemies of Israel. They will constantly seek out to destroy Israel. So we can see that from the beginning, you have one who is of God of faith and one who is not. And as that continues to grow generation by generation, we see people coming closer to God, and then we see people going further away from God. And so it's important by generations, it's important by how we raise our kids and our families, because that will just multiply and multiply and multiply. So you might ask yourself, where is Jesus in chapter 36? Well, that's a great question. A chapter of nothing but names and all these things. But when I think of chapter 36, we can just see the promises of God are kept true. That he promised to bless Jacob, and he did that. And he even promised to bless Esau, even though he knew that Esau would not love him and would not have faith for him. He still promised to bless him, and God kept his promise. Hope that makes sense, and we'll see you tomorrow in chapter 37. God bless.